Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter. Hi there guys, it's Adam Martyn here, and today we're going to be talking about BBC4. That's right, the often, sometimes forgotten or underrated channel under the BBC's arsenal, because I found this article from Deadline which says BBC considers U-turn on closing BBC4. So just as a quick refresher for anyone who might have forgotten or might not be aware, last year in 2022, actually it was around May, 26th of May 2022, the BBC reported on itself saying that it planned to move CBBC and BBC4 online. Now this was down to cost-cutting measures. The Culture Secretary of the time, Nadine Dorries, announced a freeze in the licence fee, which is the primary source of income for the Beeb, which meant that budget cuts were going to have to be made, and making those channels digital not only would save some money, but also was going to try and spearhead this sort of BBC digital first transition, as it were. But almost a year later, this article is reporting that the BBC is considering a U-turn. It says it's considering a U-turn on closing BBC4 as a television channel amid solid ratings and a backlash against cuts at the corporation. The BBC said last year that it would shut down BBC4's linear channel and move the brand online from 2025 as part of plans to become a digital-first broadcaster. Deadline hears, however, that the BBC's content team is considering maintaining the channel given its relatively low running costs and popularity with viewers. I always sort of thought that about BBC4, that even though it does make its original programming, a lot of what they do show is still archive stuff, and it's not a 24-hour-a-day channel. I believe it only broadcasts for, say, what is it, between 9 and 10 hours or something like that. So I always thought it would be one of the cheaper channels to run compared to, say, BBC One, BBC Two. Sources, I love that, sources. Sources said no decision has been made, but there is growing confidence it could be rescued. Tim Davie, who's the current Director General of the BBC, is minded to save BBC4, said one source familiar with the Director General's thinking. Another BBC insider said the position has not changed since last May, when Davie announced it would move online alongside CBBC. See, this is the problem when it's just unnamed sources who say they're familiar with their way of thinking. I could easily, stand up and say, oh yes, I know Tim Davie's way of thinking because I've read a lot of interviews with him. So, okay, maybe it's more of a 50-50 thing then? BBC4 has been hollowed out to become largely an archive service, where highbrow comedy and documentaries are curated for discerning viewers. Its budget of £22 million is half of what it was in 2017, and the BBC's Ofcom enforced operating licence, which was published last week, reduced the channel's original production quota to 65%. Well, there you go. So 65% of the content currently on BBC4 is original content. That's still more than half. That's still a lot of original documentaries or factual programmes, which the BBC has always done really well in. I think that's one of their strongest assets as a corporation over the years. The standard of the documentaries, of the factual programming has been second to none, and BBC4 has been a good hub for that over the last 20 years. So a £22 million budget, half of what it was in 2017, mind you, and yet they're saying, or this is claiming that the ratings are good, it's fairly popular. Despite the original content cuts, BBC4, which gave the world hits like Detectress and The Thick of It, that's true, that did start over there, enjoyed its highest viewing figures in a year last December, when its monthly reach was 19 million. This audience figure sank to 15.8 million in February, but it was still double the reach of BBC Three, which was reinstated to TV last year with a budget of 80 million. We come to BBC Three in a second, but let's just break that down a minute. So December 2022, its monthly reach was 19 million viewers. Now I'm sure channels like BBC One, 2, ITV, I'm sure they completely dwarf BBC4. But again, keep in mind, this is a channel that only broadcasts in the evening and the early hours of the morning. It mainly focuses on arts or documentary based programming. But, even in the age of streaming, documentary programs are very popular. A lot of friends I know tend to watch these documentary series on Netflix or other streaming sites. So why not BBC4 as well if something catches their eye? So this brings it on to BBC Three. There is a growing consensus at the BBC and beyond that the decision to revive BBC Three as a television channel last year has not been successful. The channel's biggest linear hit has been the US version of The Traitors, rather than an original show, and there is a sense that young audiences are not as engaged with the service as the BBC would like. Shows such as RuPaul's Drag Race UK continue to perform well, but mainly on the iPlayer. And sadly, I think that confirms a prediction that a lot of people had, and that I had to some extent. If you remember last year, I did report on BBC Three coming back to TV, and I think I remember being quite excited because, I grew up with BBC Three being a TV channel at that time, sort of the late 2000s, early 2010s. It did really feel like a hub for content for 18 to 24-year-olds. There were a lot of shows on there that me and my friends would watch regularly. We'd actively go and tune into, try and make sure we caught it on broadcast, etc. And I know attitudes change. Again, streaming is like the more dominant thing now. But I did hope that BBC Three could become that thing again on traditional TV. But this is just surprising to read. So The Traitors, yes, I know that was undeniably popular on BBC One, and the US version's been shown on BBC Three. But as it says, that's just mainly, an adaptation. That's not an original show in the sense. And yes, RuPaul's Drag Race, a fabulous show. But interesting how it mainly performs well on the iPlayer. Mainly seems people are watching it on catch-up as opposed to BBC Three itself. Continuing on, BBC Three's monthly reach of 7.4 million viewers in February was its lowest since it was restored to TV in February 2022. One source said the decision to promote BBC Three controller Fiona Campbell to a new role overseeing the BBC's youth audience signalled a shift in thinking. Removing BBC Three from linear would represent a climb down, however, given that it first went online only in 2016 before that decision was reversed in one of the last moves made by Davies' predecessor, Tony Hall. So again, breaking this down a little bit, its monthly reach in February, BBC Three, was 7.4 million viewers, which it claims is its lowest since it returned to TV. BBC Four Mind You in February had more than double of that monthly viewership, 15.8 million. So there's clearly something not clicking here. And again, they've backed themselves into a difficult corner because, again, a bit of history for those who may not remember. BBC Three, as it says, did go online only originally back in 2016. It was one of the first BBC services to do so, one of the first recognisable channels to do so. And back then, it was met with a lot of scepticism, a lot of criticism, but I think people gradually warmed to the idea and adapted to it as the years went on. And then, as it says, it got reversed in 2022, which seemed to be an odd reversal of decision, and maybe in hindsight now an odd allocation of budget. So, but if they do make BBC Three online only again, that's acknowledging to the media world, to the audience, to anyone who cares about this sort of stuff like I do, that maybe that decision was a mistake, that it was a failure to bring it back to TV, which would be a shame. But I mean, what else can they do? Some see the BBC Three decision as being incongruous with Davies' push to embrace a digital switchover. The Director General said last year that the BBC would have fewer linear broadcast services over the next decade, but then qualified his comments in January, saying they were meant to be provocative. What's the point in being provocative if what you're saying isn't concrete? Saying, oh yes, we're going to have fewer linear broadcast services. Oh my goodness, how provocative. I hate this sort of media speak industry terms of, we're going to say something just to... I know why they do it, of course, but it's so frustrating. So, if Tim Davies really committed to embracing this digital switchover, then he might just have to bite the bullet and make BBC Three online only again, because, you can't keep linear channels if you want to move to a digital switchover. He told the UK Parliament's Public Accounts Committee, "We should have an aggressive plan, but that is not a plan to remove things used by lots of people too soon." But I'd assume that mainly concerns, BBC One, BBC Two, a lot of the traditional radio stations, stuff like that. That is used by a lot of people still. BBC Three, if this to go by, 7.4 monthly viewers in February, that is a big number. But if BBC 4's dwarfing that by more than double, why should that have to be the one that goes digital compared to BBC Three? Potential public backlash could also be a factor in the BBC 4 decision. The BBC often faces an audience outcry when it threatens to close services, recently reversing plans to shut down the BBC Singers Choir after widespread criticism, and that's absolutely correct. We recently did a video addressing that and some of the other stuff that's been going on at the BBC, so you can go and check that out if you like. There's also a perception that the BBC could be overcorrecting in its efforts to engage young audiences, meaning shows and services that skew older are potentially feeling the brunt of the cuts. Closing BBC 4 and maintaining BBC 3 would support that narrative. And a source, again just a source, said they're so obsessed by youth here that sometimes they can't see the wood for the trees. This argument is tricky because, yes, the BBC has the difficult job of trying to appeal to everyone. Every gender, every race, every age demographic, instead of just one particular one. And I know what the drive to focus on young audiences at the minute probably is partially fueled by, as the new generations come in, less and less of them are watching or consuming BBC content as opposed to the older generations. Because when the older generations were young, BBC content predominantly was what was on offer. You had ITV, of course, and then Channel 4, but do you know what I mean? The pool of offerings was a lot more limited, severely more limited than it is nowadays when you've got the streaming sites to compare with, all the satellite channels, anything like that. So I understand to some degree why the BBC is really trying to push some of its services or some aspects of its branding towards younger audiences to try and draw them in. But I also see the argument of skewing older audiences, not catering for them. I know it says they feel the brunt of the cuts, but still, if ever I don't watch TV that often, like linear television, but I do watch it every now and then. And I must admit, I'm 27 years old. I still, if the demographics haven't shifted, I still potentially fall into the bracket that BBC Three is trying to cater for. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, folks. Since it's come back to TV in February 2022, I have not tuned into BBC Three once. I remember looking at the schedules when it came back on, and there wasn't anything that grabbed me then. I dipped in every now and then just to see what was there, but nothing really held my interest. So if me as a 27-year-old isn't finding that offering enticing or something I want to watch, then that could be the same, not for everyone obviously, but that could be the same for a lot of other people in that demographic. But also, a lot of programming, I'd argue, still does cater older. Stuff I see pop up on the schedules, I'd argue, still mainly has an older audience, an older fan base, if you will, or attracts older crowds. So whilst I understand what this article's saying about, older audiences might feel the brunt of the cuts, I'd argue there's still more than enough content, more than enough programming across TV and radio that caters to them. I have seen some people say, oh, well, everything for older people's going. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think there is still a lot of content for older audiences. It's just, I guess for the BBC, it's trying to find that balance, a decent amount of balance between catering for the young and catering for the older as well. The last bit of this article just talks about content cuts, which, again, we sort of addressed in another video, but I'll just quickly go over it here. It unveiled the move to cut 1,000 hours worth of shows per year as it battles to hit the annual overall savings target that's increased by 40% to £400 million by 2027-28, and difficult choices lie ahead, said the Beeb, as it strips nearly £100 million out of its TV budget alone. And Deadline understands there's an informal review currently taking place with commissioners examining mid-budget shows that are not cutting through as much as they would like. A number of these shows are set to be culled over the coming weeks, while Autumn Watch and Frankie Boyle's New World Order have recently been cut. The first show revealed to be ending in the post-annual plan era, family comedy hit Ghosts, emerged this morning, although this decision was made separate to the 1,000 hours and it was always intended to conclude after 5 seasons. I did see that. A lot of people seem to enjoy Ghosts. I think it's a show I need to give a try because a lot of people loved it. Again, a comedy for families, but that is going to be concluding. And if you watch this channel, you'll know there's been a lot of cuts in various shows, not just on the BBC, ITV as well. That's for, again, trying to save money amidst all the hyperinflation that's going on, especially in the media industry at the minute. So the BBC really, in terms of its financial savings, is really up against the wall. Jobs are going to be lost. Services are probably going to have to be cut somewhere across the corporation. In terms of just I hate saying it, but in terms of just running a business from a business standpoint, some things are going to have to go unless they get a major boost in funding, but I don't see that happening anytime soon, especially not in regards to the license fee. As things stand now, if I was Director General of the BBC, looking at these, if these raw figures are correct, it would seem more sense to me to reverse things, maybe put BBC Three back online, keep BBC Four as a linear channel, at least in the near future. Because, again, looking at those numbers, BBC Four in February 2023 is getting more than double the amount of viewers in the month than BBC Three, which is a big blow to the corporation, really, because they really tried to push that BBC Three was back on TV. It was going to recapture that zeitgeist it sort of had, capturing the young adult demographic, and seemingly, whilst it does have a audience, it doesn't seem to have caught on in the way that they hoped. So unfortunately for the Beeb, I literally think they are going to have to bite the bullet, move BBC Three back online, despite all of the the attention it'll get, the sort of jeers of, oh, well, wasn't that a mistake? I think you're just going to have to bite the bullet, move it back online, keep BBC 4, and see how things go. If over these next 3 years, as they say, originally they were going to close it in 2025, around that time. If over these next few years that audience reach really starts to dip for whatever reason, then sure, maybe continue those plans to move it online. But if that audience reach stays, or even, dare I say, grows, then maybe there is a case to keep it on linear television alongside BBC One and BBC Two. But let me know what you think about all of this. Do you think BBC4 does have a realistic chance of being saved and staying on linear television after all? Or do you think this is all wishful thinking, and despite the positive numbers, do you think they're going to follow through with this? Do you think it's going to go online only? And what do you think is going to happen to BBC Three? Let me know in the comments. Do you think that's going to stick on TV, or do you think they will have to reverse that decision quite early? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it. It really does help us out here on the channel, and if you're new, please do subscribe. We'd love to have you aboard. In the meantime, I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Hooks Media, Ben Freeman, Ethan Carberry-Holt, Bruce Danton, Globe of Reviews, Derek Chambers, Sean Knock, Dord Khan, and Fabina UPC V2.0, our AMTV staff members.